case. Yeah. Okay, and the third talk is will be given by Harald Werther. And Harald, he's very famous for his action against the GPL violators. I think most of you have known him before. And today he will focus on the embedded device. And as you know, that those embedded devices, most of them are manufactured and designed and manufactured by Taiwan companies here. So here in Harald's talk today, he will talk about some typical types of the violations, and he will also talk about how we can avoid these violations with a little extra effort, only in the development process. And so now let's welcome Harald.
Thank you for the introduction. Okay, well, we only have 30 minutes, so I get started. Yeah, there's a couple of slides in this presentation which I'm going to skip very quickly, such as this one. If you want to read more about what I've been doing, then you can check the slide after the presentation. I just want to go back to something that may or may not have been discussed already, something very fundamental. I think we talk about these legal issues, about licenses, license violations, about patents and so on. And one point that I want to make clear is that free and open source software development is not about legal issues. It's about creating technology and allowing other people to continue to create technology. And it's about fundamental freedoms, which are outlined on the slide. And the licenses and the entire legal framework are just intended to support that model. They are not the goal, right? The goal is to collaboratively create technology, and the license is just helping us to do so. So I think just put that in perspective when we talk about these legal issues. Again, some terminology. I think copyleft has not been mentioned before. Copyleft is the idea to use the legal concept or the legal framework of copyright to ensure those fundamental software freedoms for software. And so free software is not public domain software. It is copyrighted software, just like any other software that people create and claim copyright on. But the way how this copyright is being used is very different from other software licenses that you might find in proprietary software development. The GNU GPL has been mentioned numerous times. Is one of many licenses, the most popular license for free software. And it uses this concept, this idea of copyleft, and applies it to, in legal word, and applies it to software. And you could think of it as establishing some kind of fairness, right? A company that wants to create a product or that wants to develop some software can use existing GPL licensed software and they can use it, without having to pay any license royalties or something like that. But whatever that company adds to this software, whatever you do, you have to give that back. It's sort of, you can think of it as payment in kind, a kind of approach. So, and this method of sharing advancement of software inside the free software community is a motivational factor for software developers such as myself. The GNU General Public License version 2, it regulates distribution of software. Distribution can mean a copy on CD-ROM or distribution over the internet and so on. And it has fundamentally three conditions when you pass the software along. The license itself has to be mentioned, and a copy of the license text has to be passed along. And if such distribution happens in binary form, then the source code either has to be included with the binary, or you have to provide what's called a written offer, which says basically is a statement saying, well, if you want to have access to the source code, you know, please write us to this or that address, contact us, and we will provide the copy to you. The GPL has a statement on what's called the complete corresponding source code. This is something that in practical GPL cases we see a lot of issues here. And the GPL states complete source code, which is the source code that needs to be provided, means all source code for all modules which means the software contains, plus any associated interface definition files, plus the scripts used to control compilation and installation of the executable. Now, if you're a software developer and you think in terms of writing a program in C or C++, then that means you have the source code files, the C files. You have the make files, because make files control the compilation process. You have compile time configuration, such as the kernel config file. If you compile a Linux kernel, you have a file that contains the configuration of the kernel, and that is part of the compilation process, so it needs to be provided. And now, for many of the source code releases that companies in the embedded world make, they do not really understand what it means, complete corresponding source code. So I think the question or the check that you have to do when you make such a source code release is, well, why am I doing all this? Right? Why am I preparing this source code release? I'm not preparing it because some lawyer has written that into some license, but you're preparing the source code release because the intent of this license is to facilitate a certain development model, a cooperative development model of software development. And you need to provide what's needed to make sure the recipient of the software can recompile the software, can modify it, and can run modified versions of the software. If whatever you provide is sufficient for the receiver to do so, then certainly you have fulfilled the obligation. Right? So I encourage people to think a little bit more in terms of practical issues rather than the last letter and the last space and the last word in the license text. Right? The license tries to describe the minimum necessary steps in legal language, but the goal really is that whoever you give the source code to, he should be able to modify, recompile, and rebuild the system. Right, modifications to software, well, a subject that has been discussed a lot in lots of discussions. One fundamental concept that people often get wrong is, oh, I didn't modify the software, so I don't need to release the source code. The GPL, the requirement to provide the source code to a particular program is always present, whether you have modified that program or not. It doesn't matter. You always have to, if you distribute GPL licensed software, you always have to provide the source code for that software, even if you did not modify it. If you modify the source code, then there are a couple of things mentioned in the license. First of all, your changes have to be visible, identifiable. That's also something we see wrong in a lot of the source code offers coming from embedded companies, that it's very hard to find out what was the original version of the program, because they may have removed the version information or removed the changelog or something like that. And what were the specific additions that this particular company made to the source code. So a practical, technical solution to this is you have a tar file with the original source code, and you have a patch, a diff file that just contains the differences of the kind of the addition or the modification of the program you did. One potential technical solution to fulfilling that. Also, it's important to think about when does the GPL apply. As I said, it regulates distribution of software, and distribution happens whenever you pass a copy of the software around. And that can be physically inside an embedded device. So let's say you built this, whatever, this Android phone, or this TV set-top box, or whatever it is that contains a Linux kernel, for example. Then, of course, the device itself, inside the flash memory, contains a copy of the software. So when you give that copy of the software to some other company or customer, then you distribute the software. However, if you provide firmware updates on a web server, for example, then of course those firmware updates are again the GPL licensed software, and you're distributing it over the internet. So for that update on the web server, the same requirements regarding the license compliance apply. So for that update, you also have to include the GPL license text, and you have to provide the source code or a written offer how to obtain the source code. The corresponding source code to that update, not the original source code of what you shipped on the device, right? The firmware update is somehow different from the original software on the device.